The great hall fell silent the moment King Draven rose from his seat and pointed at Elena Voss. "Take her plate away," he said. His voice carried through the hall like a blade cutting through cloth. "She does not belong at this table." Elena froze with her hand still resting on the edge of the golden plate in front of her. Every noble in the hall turned to look at her. Candlelight flickered across hundreds of faces, and every single one of them wore the same look of quiet delight, the kind of delight people wear when they watch someone else fall. "Your Majesty," Elena said carefully, rising to her feet, "I do not understand." "You are human," Draven said, as if the word itself was an insult. "Your family lied to mine. They promised me a wolf bride, a woman worthy of sitting beside an alpha king, and instead, they sent me you, a girl with no claws, no fangs, no strength. A girl who does not even carry the blood that runs through every person in this room." A murmur spread through the hall. Elena's chest tightened, but she did not let her face show it. She had learned long ago, in the cold years after her father lost his title and his land, that showing fear only invited more of it. "My mother told me love does not depend on blood," Elena said quietly. Draven laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. "Love? You think this marriage was ever about love? Your father owed my father a debt he could never repay, and this was the price. I do not care what you were told. What I care about is that I will not have a human woman sitting at my royal table, eating from my royal plate, while my court watches and wonders what kind of king I have become." He snapped his fingers. Two guards stepped forward, their faces blank, trained not to question the commands of their king. One of them reached for Elena's arm. "There is no need to touch me," Elena said, pulling her arm back before the guard could grab it. "I can walk on my own." She lifted her chin and looked directly at Draven, and for one brief moment, something flickered across his face. It might have been surprise, it might have been the smallest trace of respect, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried under the same cold arrogance that had ruled his face since the moment she arrived at the palace 3 days earlier. "From tonight," Draven announced to the hall, "she eats with the servants. She sleeps in the servants' quarters. She wears no crown, no jewels, nothing that marks her as royalty. Let her learn her place." The hall erupted into whispers as Elena was led away. She did not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. Instead, she walked with her back straight and her eyes forward, past rows of nobles in silk and fur, past the long table filled with roasted meat and sweet wine that she would never taste again, and out through the tall wooden doors at the end of the hall. The corridor outside was cold and dim, lit only by a few torches along the stone walls. The guard who led her did not speak. He simply walked, boots echoing against the floor, until they reached a narrow staircase that spiraled downward, away from the grand halls and painted ceilings of the upper palace, toward the world that existed beneath it. The kitchen was warm, filled with the smell of bread and roasted vegetables, and loud with the clatter of pots and the quick footsteps of servants preparing the next course for the feast above. When Elena stepped inside, everyone stopped what they were doing. An older woman with flour on her apron and gray hair, pulled back into a tight bun, looked Elena up and down. "You are the new queen," the woman said. It was not a question. "I am no longer sure what I am," Elena replied honestly. The woman studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a small wooden table in the corner, away from the heat of the ovens. "Sit," she said. "You look like you have not eaten a real meal in days." Elena sat, grateful for the small kindness, however plain it seemed. The woman placed a bowl of vegetable stew in front of her, along with a piece of bread that was still warm. It was simple food, nothing like the feast upstairs, but Elena found she did not mind. There was something honest about it. "My name is Beatrice," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting across from Elena. "I have worked in this kitchen for 20 years. I served the old queen before she passed. May her spirit rest." "Elena," Elena said, though she suspected everyone in the palace already knew her name by now, whispered from mouth to mouth, like a piece of gossip too delicious to keep quiet. "You held your head high in there," Beatrice said. "I heard the guards talking. They said you did not cry, did not beg. That takes more strength than most people in that hall will ever have, crown or no crown." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "It did not feel like strength. It felt like the only thing I had left. Beatrice nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she was willing to say. Eat your stew, child. Tomorrow, someone will show you where you will sleep and what work will be expected of you. Tonight, just eat and try to rest. As Elena ate, she noticed a young woman near the ovens watching her with sharp, curious eyes. The woman had dark hair tied back in a practical braid and a long scar running along her jaw, the kind of scar that told a story without needing words. When their eyes met, the woman did not look away or pretend she had not been staring. Instead, she walked over and sat down beside Elena without asking permission. "You are braver than you look," the woman said, "or maybe more foolish. I have not decided which yet." "Is there a difference?" Elena asked. The woman laughed, a short, surprised sound, as if she had not expected Elena to have a sense of humor left in her after everything that had happened that evening. "My name is Mira. I work in the stables, mostly, though I get pulled into kitchen duty when they are short on hands." "Elena, I know who you are," Mira said. "Everyone in this palace knows who you are. The question is whether you know who you are, now that the king has decided you are not a queen anymore." The words stung, but there was no cruelty in the way Mira said them, only a kind of blunt honesty that Elena had not encountered since she arrived at the palace. Everyone else spoke to her in careful, polished sentences, full of hidden meanings and false politeness. Mira simply said what she thought. "I suppose I am still figuring that out," Elena admitted. Mira studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if satisfied with the answer. "Good. Anyone who claims to have it figured out after a night like tonight is either lying or has given up already. Come, I will show you where you will sleep. It is not much, but it is warmer than the halls upstairs, and no one there will look at you like you are something to be pitied." Elena followed Mira through a maze of narrow stone corridors, past storage rooms filled with sacks of grain and barrels of wine, until they reached a long, low room lined with simple wooden beds. A few other servants were already asleep, their soft breathing the only sound in the quiet space. Mira pointed to an empty bed near the back, close to a small window that let in a sliver of moonlight. "This one is yours now," Mira said. "It is not silk sheets and a canopy, but it will not collapse under you either." Elena sat down on the edge of the bed and ran her hand over the rough wool blanket. Just a few hours earlier, she had been sitting at the royal table, dressed in a gown embroidered with silver thread, expected to become the queen of an entire kingdom. Now she sat in a servant's quarters, wearing the same gown, though it suddenly felt heavier, like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Thank you," Elena said quietly, "for not treating me like I am fragile." Mira shrugged. "You do not seem fragile to me. You seem like someone who has been knocked down before and knows how to get back up. That is worth more than any crown, if you ask me." After Mira left, Elena lay awake for a long time, staring at the wooden ceiling above her. She thought about her father, about the debt that had cost her everything, about the cold look in Draven's eyes as he ordered her removed from his table, like she was nothing more than an unwanted guest. She thought about the years of careful lessons her mother had given her, lessons about grace and patience, and never letting anyone see exactly how deeply their words could cut. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the humiliation and the exhaustion, a small flame of something else began to burn. It was not anger, not exactly. It was something steadier than that. It was the quiet, unshakable decision that whatever Draven believed about her, whatever the court whispered behind painted fans and polished cups, she would not let this moment define the rest of her life. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since arriving at the palace, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not depend on the mercy of a king who saw her as nothing more than a mistake to be corrected. Outside, beyond the thick stone walls of the palace, the forest stretched for miles in every direction, dark and silent under a sky full of stars. Somewhere out there, though Elena did not know it yet, a path was already being carved that would eventually lead her far away from the servants' quarters, far away from Draven's cruelty, and toward a crown that no one would ever be able to strip from her again. But that was still to come. For now, there was only sleep, and the quiet comfort of a wool blanket, and the strange, fragile peace of a girl who had lost everything in one night, and had somehow, against all odds, decided that she would find a way to rise again. The next morning came early, announced by the sound of roosters and the clatter of pots being pulled from their shelves in the kitchen below. Elena woke to find Beatrice standing over her bed with a simple gray dress folded over one arm. "This will be more practical than the gown you arrived in," Beatrice said, setting the dress down gently. "You will be working today. Best to look the part." Elena changed quickly, feeling strangely lighter without the heavy silk and jewels that had marked her as royalty just one day before. The plain gray dress fit her well enough, though it was rougher against her skin than anything she had worn before. "What kind of work will I be doing?" Elena asked, following Beatrice down the narrow staircase toward the kitchen. "Whatever needs doing," Beatrice replied. "Today it will be helping in the kitchen, carrying water, preparing vegetables, nothing you cannot manage, I imagine." As they walked, Elena caught glimpses of the palace she had never seen before, the parts hidden behind the grand halls and painted ceilings. Storage rooms filled with old furniture, a small chapel tucked into a forgotten corner, a narrow door that seemed to lead somewhere no one wanted to talk about. The palace, she realized, was far larger and stranger than it had seemed from the royal table. By midday, Elena's hands were raw from scrubbing pots, and her back ached from bending over baskets of vegetables. Yet strangely, she did not feel as broken as she had expected. There was something almost peaceful about the simple, repetitive work, something that gave her mind space to think clearly, for the first time in weeks. It was during a brief rest, while sitting on an overturned crate near the kitchen door with a cup of water in her hands, that she first noticed the whispers among the older servants. They spoke in low voices, careful not to be overheard, about the previous queen, about a war fought years ago, and about a debt that had destroyed more than one noble family. Elena listened closely, though she said nothing. She had a feeling that the truth about how she had come to be standing in that kitchen, wearing a servant's dress, ran far deeper than a simple marriage arrangement gone wrong. And she intended to find out exactly how deep it went. For now, though, she finished her water, set the cup aside, and returned to her work, letting the rhythm of the kitchen settle around her like a strange, unexpected shelter. Whatever waited for her beyond these walls, whatever truth she would eventually uncover, she would face it the same way she had faced Draven's cruelty the night before, with her head held high, and her heart steady, no matter how much the world around her tried to convince her that she did not deserve either. 3 weeks passed, and Elena's hands grew used to the work that had once left them raw and blistered. She learned to knead dough before dawn, to carry heavy buckets of water without spilling a drop, and to move quietly through the palace corridors without drawing attention to herself. What surprised her most was how much she was learning, not just about kitchen work, but about the palace itself, and about the people who kept it running. "You are quick," Beatrice told her one morning, watching Elena chop vegetables with practiced speed. "Quicker than most who come from noble houses. They usually complain for a week before they figure out which end of the knife to hold." "I had a good teacher," Elena said, glancing toward the old cook with a small smile. Beatrice waved a hand dismissively, though Elena could tell she was pleased. "You had determination. That is worth more than any teacher." As the days passed, Elena began to notice things about the palace that she had never paid attention to when she was expected to sit quietly at royal dinners and smile politely at nobles she barely knew. She noticed which guards patrolled which corridors, and at what hours. She noticed the hidden passage behind the wine cellar that the older servants used to move between floors without being seen by the court above. She noticed the way certain nobles avoided speaking to each other entirely, as if some old argument still simmered beneath their polite greetings. Most of all, she noticed Mira, who seemed to appear whenever Elena needed company, and who never once treated her as though she were less than anyone else in the palace. "You ask a lot of questions," Mira said one afternoon, as the two of them sat together near the stables, taking a rare break from their duties. "More than most people who end up down here." "I like to understand the place I am living in," Elena replied. "It seems safer that way." Mira raised an eyebrow. Safer from what? Elena hesitated. She had not spoken openly about her suspicions to anyone, not even Beatrice, whom she had come to trust more than most people in the palace. But something about Mira's directness made her feel she could speak honestly. "I do not believe this marriage was simply about my family owing a debt," Elena said quietly. "There is something else, something no one wants to say out loud." Mira was quiet for a long moment, glancing around to make sure no one else was close enough to hear. "You are right to wonder," she finally said, "but some truths are dangerous to chase, especially for someone in your position. I already lost my title, my place at the royal table, and most of my dignity in front of the entire court, Elena said. I am not sure what else I have left to lose. Mira studied her carefully, as if weighing how much to say. There is an old cook, Edmund, who works in the wine cellar. He has been here longer than Beatrice, longer than almost anyone in this palace. If anyone knows the truth about your family and the old king, it would be him. That evening, after her duties were finished, Elena made her way down to the wine cellar, following the directions Mira had given her. The cellar was cool and dim, lined with wooden barrels and shelves of dusty bottles, and smelled faintly of old wood and fermented grapes. In the corner, seated on a low stool, was an elderly man with a thick gray beard and hands that looked like they had spent decades working with wood and stone. You must be the girl everyone is whispering about, the old man said without looking up from the barrel he was inspecting. My name is Elena, she said. I know your name, Edmund replied. I knew your father's name too, once, before everything fell apart. Elena's heart quickened. You knew my father? Edmund finally looked up, his eyes sharp despite his age. I knew him well enough to know that the story you have been told about his debt is not the whole truth. Then tell me the whole truth, Elena said, stepping closer. Edmund studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was ready to hear what he had to say. Finally he sighed, and gestured for her to sit on an overturned crate nearby. Your father was not a careless man who gambled away his fortune, as the court likes to whisper, Edmund began. He was a loyal advisor to the crown, trusted by the old king, King Alden, Draven's father. Your father discovered something during his years of service, something about how King Alden had gained control over several smaller territories. What did he discover? Elena asked. That the old king did not simply conquer those lands through fair battle, Edmund said. He made agreements with certain families, promises of protection and wealth, and then broke those promises once he no longer needed them. Entire villages were left without support, without the resources they had been promised, all so King Alden could strengthen his own treasury. Elena felt a cold chill settle over her. My father knew about this? Your father tried to expose it, Edmund said. He believed the nobility deserved to know the truth about how their king had built his power, but before he could bring the matter before the court, King Alden discovered his intentions. Rather than have your father openly executed, which would have raised questions and suspicion, he manufactured a debt, a false accusation of financial wrongdoing that stripped your family of nearly everything you owned. And the marriage, Elena said slowly, pieces beginning to click into place, was never meant to save my family's name. It was meant to keep me close, where the crown could control what I knew, and make sure I never learned the truth. Edmund nodded grimly. King Alden passed the plan on to his son before he died. Draven likely does not know the full truth himself. He was told simply that your family owed a debt, and that marrying you would settle old business between the two houses. I do not believe he was ever told what that business truly was. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing everything Edmund had told her. The humiliation she had suffered at the royal table, the years of hardship her family had endured, all of it had been built on lies, designed to protect a king's reputation, a king who was no longer even alive to answer for what he had done. Why are you telling me this? Elena finally asked. You could have kept silent. It would have been safer for you. Edmund's expression softened slightly. Because your father was a good man who tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. And because I do not believe you are the kind of woman who will simply accept the role this palace has forced upon you. You remind me of him, in more ways than you probably realize. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, though she blinked them back before they could fall. It was strange, hearing someone speak of her father with such respect, after years of hearing his name whispered as a cautionary tale about foolish debt. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me the truth. Be careful with it, Edmund warned. Knowledge like this is dangerous in a palace like this one. If Draven were to learn that you know the truth about his father's actions, there is no telling how he might react. Elena nodded, understanding the weight of the warning. She left the wine cellar that evening, with far more than she had arrived with, not just knowledge about her family's past, but a new sense of purpose that had been missing since the night she was cast down from the royal table. Over the following days, Elena moved through her duties with quiet determination, careful not to let anyone suspect the shift that had taken place within her. She continued scrubbing pots and carrying water, continued sleeping in the narrow servants' quarters, continued eating simple meals prepared by Beatrice's steady hands. But inside, she was no longer simply enduring her circumstances. She was watching, learning, preparing for a future she could not yet clearly see, but which she was determined to shape with her own hands. Mira noticed the change in her, almost immediately. "You look different," she observed one evening, as the two of them walked together toward the servants' quarters after a long day of work. "Different how?" Elena asked. "Steadier," Mira said. "Like you have found solid ground beneath your feet, even if the rest of us cannot see it yet." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Maybe I have." She did not tell Mira everything Edmund had shared with her, not yet. Some truths needed time to settle before they could be shared safely, and Elena was not yet certain what she intended to do with the knowledge she now carried. But she trusted Mira more than almost anyone else in the palace, and she suspected that trust would prove important in the days ahead. As autumn deepened and the nights grew colder, Elena found herself increasingly drawn to the palace gardens during her rare moments of free time. The gardens were mostly untended, in the areas farthest from the main halls, filled with wild herbs and overgrown paths that few nobles ever bothered to explore. It was there, among the tangled roses and quiet stone benches, that Elena felt most free to think, to plan, and to imagine a life beyond the walls that currently confined her. She did not yet know that her quiet evenings in the gardens were about to be interrupted by an encounter that would change the course of her life entirely. She did not know that beyond the palace walls, in the dense forest that stretched for miles toward the northern mountains, a wounded stranger was making his way carefully through the trees, unaware that his path was about to cross with hers, in a way that neither of them could have predicted. For now, Elena simply breathed in the cool evening air, felt the weight of the truth she now carried settle into something steadier than grief, and allowed herself, for the first time in weeks, to imagine that perhaps her story was not yet finished. Perhaps, despite everything Draven had taken from her, there was still a version of her future that belonged entirely to herself. The forest beyond the palace walls stretched wide and quiet, its trees tall enough to blot out most of the afternoon light. Elena had begun slipping away from the palace grounds during the brief hours when her duties allowed it, drawn by the promise of open air and silence that could not be found within the stone corridors of the servants' quarters. She told Beatrice she was gathering herbs for the kitchen, and it was not entirely a lie. She had learned which plants could season a stew, and which could ease a headache, knowledge that had proven useful more than once. That afternoon, the air smelled of damp earth and pine, and Elena moved carefully along a narrow path she had discovered during her earlier walks, one that wound past a shallow stream before disappearing into a thicker part of the woods. She carried a small woven basket, half filled with wild herbs, when she heard it, a low groan, followed by the sound of something heavy shifting against the ground. Elena froze, her instincts telling her to turn back toward the safety of the palace. But something in the sound, a note of pain rather than threat, made her hesitate. Carefully, she moved toward the source of the noise, pushing aside a low branch to reveal a man lying against the base of a tree, his clothes torn and stained with blood along one side. "Do not come closer," the man warned, his voice rough but controlled, even as he struggled to sit up straighter against the tree trunk. "You are hurt," Elena said, ignoring the warning and kneeling down a careful distance away. "I am not here to harm you." The man studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes sharp despite the pain clearly written across his face. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than Elena, with dark hair damp against his forehead, and a jaw set tight against whatever discomfort he was trying to hide. Beneath the torn fabric of his cloak, Elena could see a deep wound along his side, still bleeding steadily. "Who are you?" the man asked, his eyes flickering toward the direction of the palace, visible in the distance through the trees. "No one important," Elena replied carefully. It was, in a strange way, the most honest answer she could give. "I work in the palace kitchens." The man's expression relaxed slightly, though his guard did not fully drop. "A kitchen worker who wanders alone through dangerous woods. I could say the same of a stranger bleeding beneath a tree," Elena countered. Despite the pain evident in his face, the corner of the man's mouth twitched upward, as if he found her response amusing. "Fair enough. You need help," Elena said, setting her basket down and moving closer to examine the wound along his side. This needs to be cleaned, or it will grow worse. I do not have time to rest, the man said, though he made no move to stop her as she gently pulled back the torn fabric of his cloak to get a better look at the injury. I have somewhere I need to be. You will not get very far bleeding like this, Elena said practically. Whatever business is waiting for you can wait a little longer, or you will not survive to complete it. The man watched her closely as she worked, using strips torn from the edge of her own dress to press against the wound, slowing the bleeding as best she could with the limited supplies she had on hand. His eyes held a quiet intensity that made Elena feel as though he were studying her far more carefully than the situation required. You handle this well, he observed. Most kitchen workers I have encountered would have run screaming at the sight of blood. I have seen worse, Elena said simply, thinking briefly of the humiliation she had endured just weeks earlier. A different kind of wound that had left no visible mark, but had cut just as deeply. What is your name? The man asked. Elena hesitated. Something told her that revealing too much, too quickly, might not be wise, especially with a stranger whose own identity remained a mystery. Elena, she finally said. And yours? The man paused, and for a brief moment, something guarded flickered across his face. Kale, he said. That is all I can offer for now. That seems fair, considering I found you bleeding in the woods with no explanation of how you came to be here, Elena said, tying off the makeshift bandage as best she could. Kale watched her hands work with careful precision. I was traveling through this territory when I was attacked. Bandits, most likely, though I did not get a clear look at them before I managed to escape. Elena studied his face, searching for any sign that he was lying, though she found nothing but quiet exhaustion and pain. This territory is dangerous for travelers, especially near the palace grounds. The forest here is heavily patrolled. So I have learned, Kale said dryly, glancing down at his injured side. You should not move for a while, Elena said, sitting back on her heels. Not until the bleeding stops completely. There is a hollow beneath the roots of that large oak tree, not far from here. It should offer some shelter until you have regained enough strength to travel. Kale studied her carefully. You are helping a stranger you found bleeding in the woods, without asking many questions. That seems unusually trusting for someone who claims to have seen worse than blood. Perhaps I have simply learned that judging people by their circumstances rarely tells the whole truth, Elena said, thinking again of her own situation, cast down from a royal table to a servant's kitchen in a single evening. Something shifted in Kale's expression, a flicker of genuine curiosity replacing the earlier caution. That is an unusually wise thought for a kitchen worker. Perhaps kitchen workers are wiser than most people give them credit for, Elena replied evenly. Kale allowed himself a small, tired smile. I am beginning to believe that. Over the following hour, Elena helped Kale move carefully to the hollow beneath the oak tree, gathering additional herbs along the way that she knew could help with pain and prevent infection. She promised to return the following day with proper supplies, and Kale, despite his evident reluctance to rely on anyone, agreed to wait for her. Why are you helping me? Kale asked, as Elena prepared to leave as the light began to fade. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. Because I know what it feels like to be left alone when you are at your most vulnerable. I would not wish that on anyone, even a stranger I know nothing about. Kale watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something between gratitude and quiet wonder. Thank you, Elena. Rest, she said simply, gathering her basket and turning back toward the path that would lead her to the palace. I will return tomorrow. True to her word, Elena returned the following afternoon, and the afternoon after that, carrying clean bandages, herbs for the wound, and small portions of bread and dried meat she had carefully saved from her own meals. Each visit, she found Kale a little stronger, the color slowly returning to his face, though he remained cautious about revealing much about himself or his reasons for traveling through the territory. You still have not told me where you were headed, Elena said, on her fourth visit, as she checked the healing wound along his side. And you still have not told me why a kitchen worker speaks with the manner of someone raised in a noble household, Kale countered, watching her closely. Elena's hands paused briefly, before continuing their work. Perhaps we both have reasons for keeping certain things to ourselves. Kale studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if accepting the fairness of her answer. Perhaps we do. Despite the guarded nature of their conversations, something warm and unexpected had begun to grow between them during those quiet afternoons in the forest. Kale listened when Elena spoke, really listened, in a way that felt entirely different from the careful, calculated attention she had grown accustomed to at royal gatherings, and Elena found herself looking forward to their conversations more than she cared to admit, drawn to the quiet strength and unexpected gentleness hidden beneath his cautious exterior. "You carry yourself like someone who has lost something important," Kale observed one afternoon, as they sat together beneath the oak tree, the autumn light filtering gently through the branches above them. Elena was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. "I have," she finally admitted, "though I am beginning to believe that what feels like loss now might eventually reveal itself as something else entirely." "That is a hopeful way of viewing loss," Kale said. "It is the only way I know how to keep moving forward," Elena replied. Kale reached out, hesitating only briefly, before gently taking her hand in his. "Whatever you lost, Elena, I do not believe it was your worth. Anyone who could make you believe otherwise was simply too blind to see what was standing in front of them." Elena felt her breath catch slightly at his words, surprised by how deeply they settled into the quiet ache she had been carrying since the night of her humiliation at the royal table. She did not pull her hand away. "You speak as though you understand exactly what I lost," she said softly. "Perhaps I understand more than you realize," Kale replied, his gray eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. They sat together in comfortable silence as the light continued to fade around them, two strangers, bound together by circumstance, each carrying secrets they were not yet ready to share, yet each finding an unexpected comfort in the other's presence that neither of them had anticipated when their paths first crossed in the quiet woods beyond the palace walls. Elena did not yet know that the man sitting beside her, the wounded stranger she had chosen to help without hesitation, carried a title far greater than her own lost crown. She did not know that he was the exiled king of a northern realm, traveling through dangerous territory to gather information before a planned uprising against the very kingdom that had cast her down. And Kale, watching the quiet strength in her eyes as she spoke of loss and hope in the same steady breath, did not yet know that the woman before him carried within her the blood of an old and rightful claim to lands far beyond the palace, where she currently scrubbed pots and carried water. For now, there was only the forest, the fading light, and the quiet, growing warmth between two people who had each been shaped by loss into something steadier and stronger than either of them had been before. Whatever truths remained hidden, whatever titles and destinies waited to be revealed, that afternoon beneath the oak tree marked the quiet beginning of something that neither Draven's cruelty nor the secrets of two kingdoms would ultimately be able to destroy. Weeks passed, and Kale's wound healed enough that he no longer needed the hollow beneath the oak tree, though he lingered in the forest near the palace far longer than his original mission had required. He told himself it was because he still needed time to gather information about Draven's territory before returning north, but every time Elena appeared along the forest path, basket in hand, and a quiet smile on her face, he knew the truth ran deeper than strategy. "You are still here," Elena said, one crisp morning, finding Kale seated on a fallen log near their usual meeting place, sharpening a small blade with practiced, steady movements. "I told you I had somewhere to be," Kale replied, not looking up from his work. "I did not say I was in any hurry to get there." Elena settled onto the log beside him, setting her basket down between them. "That sounds like an excuse." "Perhaps it is," Kale admitted, finally glancing up to meet her eyes. "I have found reasons to stay that I did not expect to find." Something warm settled in Elena's chest at his words, though she quickly redirected the conversation, unwilling to examine too closely the feelings that had grown steadily between them over the past several weeks. "I brought bread. Beatrice made too much this morning, or so she claimed, though I suspect she simply guessed I would be sharing it with someone." "Beatrice sounds like a woman who misses very little," Kale observed, accepting the offered bread with a grateful nod. "She does," Elena said, smiling faintly. "She has become something like family to me, in this strange new life I did not choose for myself." Kale studied her carefully. "Do you regret it? The life you did not choose?" Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "There are moments I regret the circumstances that led me here, but I do not regret who I have become because of them. I have learned things in that kitchen that I never would have learned sitting at a royal table, surrounded by people who only ever saw my title and never truly saw me. I understand that more than you might realize, Cale said quietly. Then tell me, Elena said, turning to face him fully. Tell me who you truly are, Cale. I have shared enough of myself these past weeks that I believe I have earned at least that much honesty in return. Cale was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face, as though weighing the risk of what he was about to share. Finally, he set down the blade he had been sharpening and turned to face her directly. My full name is Cale Ashworth, he said. I was born the heir to the Northern Realm, a kingdom beyond the mountains that once stood as an equal power to Draven's territory, before a group of nobles loyal to false promises overthrew my father and forced our family into exile. Elena's breath caught, pieces of information rearranging themselves rapidly in her mind. You are a king. An exiled one, Cale clarified. For the past several years, I have been gathering allies, resources, and information, preparing to reclaim what was taken from my family. My journey through this territory was part of that effort, scouting Draven's lands, understanding his alliances, before the uprising I have been planning finally begins. And the bandits who attacked you? Elena said slowly. Were they truly bandits, or were they something else? Cale's expression darkened slightly. I believe they were sent by someone within Draven's court, someone who suspected my true purpose for traveling through this region. I have not yet determined who betrayed my presence here, but I intend to find out before I return north. Elena sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of everything Cale had shared. A king, exiled and fighting to reclaim his rightful place, had been hiding just beyond the walls of the very palace that had cast her down from her own position as queen. The parallel was not lost on her. We are more alike than either of us realized, she finally said. Both of us stripped of what should rightfully have been ours. Both of us finding strength in circumstances that were meant to break us. Cale reached for her hand again, more confidently this time. I do not believe circumstances alone define a person's strength, Elena. I have met many people born into privilege, who crumble the moment life demands anything difficult of them. And I have met very few people, in all my years of exile, who carry themselves with the quiet steadiness that you do, despite everything that has been taken from you. You barely know me, Elena said softly, though she made no move to pull her hand away. I know enough, Cale replied. I know that you found a stranger bleeding in the woods and chose kindness over fear. I know that you carry yourself with dignity, even while wearing a servant's dress in a kitchen that does not recognize your worth. And I know that every conversation we have shared these past weeks has left me looking forward to the next one, more than I care to admit, given everything I still need to accomplish. Elena felt her heart quicken at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunlight filtering through the trees above them. I have looked forward to our conversations as well, she admitted quietly. More than I expected to, given how little either of us has been willing to share about ourselves until now. They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the weight of shared truth settling between them like something solid and grounding. Finally, Cale spoke again, his voice more serious than before. Elena, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to answer honestly. Of course, Elena said. What do you know about your family's history? Specifically, do you know anything about a treaty that once existed between your father's house and the Northern Realm, before my family was exiled? Elena's brow furrowed in confusion. No, my father never spoke of any connection to the Northern Realm. He spoke only of his service to King Alden, and of the debt that eventually destroyed our family's standing. Cale's expression grew thoughtful, almost cautious. I have reason to believe your family's history runs deeper than you currently know. There were old records, before my family's exile, that spoke of an alliance between certain noble houses loyal to the north, houses that were later stripped of their titles, once Draven's father consolidated his power. Your family's name was among those recorded. Elena's mind raced, trying to fit this new information alongside everything Edmund had already told her in the wine cellar. Edmund, one of the palace servants, told me that my father discovered evidence of King Alden's broken promises to smaller territories. He said my father tried to expose the truth before he was silenced through a manufactured debt. Cale's eyes sharpened with sudden interest. That aligns with what I have suspected. If your father possessed evidence of King Alden's broken promises, evidence connected to the very treaty that once bound your family's house to the north, it is possible he intended to bring that evidence forward, as part of a larger effort to challenge King Alden's authority. You believe my father was working toward the same goal you are now pursuing, Elena said slowly, the realization settling over her like a quiet revelation. Reclaiming what was unjustly taken. It is possible, Cale said carefully, though I do not yet have enough evidence to say for certain. If such evidence still exists somewhere within this palace, it could prove valuable, not only for my own cause, but for restoring your family's rightful standing as well. Elena felt something shift within her, a sense of purpose crystallizing that went beyond simply surviving her circumstances in the palace kitchen. If her father had died in disgrace, fighting for a truth greater than himself, then perhaps it was her responsibility to finish what he had started, whatever the cost. I will help you, Elena said firmly. Whatever evidence exists within this palace, I will find it. My father deserves to have his name restored, and if that evidence can help your cause as well, then I consider it worth whatever risk that search requires. Cale studied her with quiet admiration, squeezing her hand gently. This will be dangerous, Elena. If Draven or his advisors discover what we are searching for, the consequences could be severe. I have already lost my title, my place at the royal table, and the comfort of the life I once expected to live, Elena said steadily. I am no longer afraid of what more this palace might try to take from me. I would rather fight for the truth than continue living quietly beneath a lie. Something in Cale's expression shifted, admiration deepening into something warmer, something that made Elena's breath catch slightly as their eyes held steady on each other beneath the golden autumn light. Then we search together, Cale said. Whatever we find, whatever it costs us, we face it together. Elena nodded, a quiet determination settling over her that felt entirely different from the fear and humiliation she had carried since the night of her banishment from the royal table. For the first time since arriving at the palace, she felt as though she was moving toward something, rather than simply enduring what had been forced upon her. As the afternoon light began to fade, Cale walked with her as far as the edge of the forest, careful to remain hidden from the palace guards who patrolled the outer grounds. Before Elena turned to make her way back toward the servants' quarters, Cale reached out and gently touched her cheek, his gray eyes searching hers with quiet intensity. Be careful, Elena, he said softly. Whatever we uncover in the days ahead, promise me you will not take unnecessary risks. I promise to be careful, Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew that the path ahead of them was unlikely to be a safe one. But I will not promise to avoid risk entirely. Some truths are worth the danger required to uncover them. Cale's expression softened into something that looked almost like admiration mixed with concern. I am beginning to understand why you have managed to survive everything this palace has thrown at you, Elena Voss. You are far stronger than anyone in that royal hall ever gave you credit for. Elena smiled faintly, the warmth of his words settling into the same quiet place where her father's memory now rested, steady and resolute. Strength is easier to find, she said, when you finally have something worth fighting for. With that, she turned and made her way back toward the palace, her mind already racing with plans for how she might begin searching for the evidence Cale believed her father had once possessed. Behind her, Cale watched until she disappeared from sight, a quiet resolve settling over his own features as he considered the unexpected turn his mission had taken. Neither of them yet knew how quickly their careful secrecy would begin to unravel, nor how soon the quiet trust they had built between them would be tested by forces far more dangerous than either had anticipated. But for now, beneath the fading autumn light, there was only the shared promise of a truth worth uncovering, and the quiet, growing bond between two people who had each been shaped by loss into something the world had underestimated. Finding evidence hidden somewhere within a palace as vast as Draven's was no simple task, and Elena quickly understood that she would need to be patient and careful if she hoped to succeed without drawing unwanted attention. Over the following days, she began paying closer attention to the parts of the palace she had previously ignored, searching for any clue that might lead her toward the records Cale believed still existed somewhere within its walls. You have been quiet lately, Mira observed one evening, as the two of them sat together near the stables after finishing their duties for the day. Quieter than usual, and that is saying something, given how careful you already are with your words. Elena hesitated, weighing how much to share. She trusted Mira, more than almost anyone else in the palace, but the information she now carried was dangerous enough that involving anyone else felt like a risk she needed to consider carefully. "I have been thinking about my father," Elena finally said, which was true, even if it was not the entire truth. "About what really happened to our family before I arrived here." Mira studied her carefully. "That sounds like the beginning of a longer story." "It might be," Elena admitted. "Mira, if I needed to find old records, documents that might have been hidden somewhere in this palace, years ago, where would you suggest I look?" Mira's expression shifted, curiosity mixing with something more cautious. "That depends on how old these records are, and how badly someone wanted them hidden. The palace has an old archive room, beneath the eastern wing, though it has not been used in years. Most of the current records are kept in the main study, close to the throne room, where Draven's advisors handle the kingdom's business. The archive room sounds safer to search," Elena said thoughtfully. "Safer, perhaps, but also less likely to contain anything recent," Mira pointed out. "If your father was involved in something significant enough to destroy your family's standing, the records related to it might have been moved somewhere more secure, somewhere only the king's most trusted advisors would have access to." Elena's heart sank slightly at the thought of trying to search anywhere near Draven's private study, an area of the palace heavily guarded and far beyond the reach of a simple kitchen worker. That would be considerably more dangerous. "Considerably," Mira agreed. "Elena, whatever you are searching for, I hope you understand the risk you are taking. If Draven discovers you poking around places you should not be, especially given how he already feels about your presence in this palace, the consequences could be severe." "I understand the risk," Elena said quietly, "but I believe the truth is worth it." Mira studied her for a long moment, then sighed, a decision settling over her features. "Then, let me help you. I have worked in this palace long enough to know which guards are careless during their rounds, and which corridors are least likely to be watched at certain hours. If you insist on doing this, at least let me help you do it safely." Gratitude swelled in Elena's chest at the offer. "Thank you, Mira. I do not know how I would manage this without your help." Over the following week, Elena and Mira carefully mapped out the palace's guard rotations, identifying the safest windows of time, during which Elena might slip away toward the eastern wing, without drawing suspicion. The archive room, when Elena finally managed to reach it late one evening, proved to be exactly as neglected as Mira had described, filled with dusty shelves and forgotten boxes that had clearly not been disturbed in years. Working quickly by the light of a single candle, Elena searched through box after box, her hands growing dusty and her back aching from bending over old crates filled with brittle paper. Most of what she found was unremarkable, old tax records and minor land disputes that held no relevance to her search. But just as she was beginning to lose hope, tucked into the bottom of a wooden box near the back of the room, she found a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn and cracked with age. Opening it carefully, Elena's breath caught as she recognized her father's handwriting, neat and precise, filling page after page with detailed notes about territorial agreements, broken promises, and the names of noble houses that had once been loyal to the Northern Realm, before King Alden's consolidation of power stripped them of their standing. Her hands trembled slightly as she read through the entries, each page confirming what Edmund and Cale had already suspected. Her father had indeed uncovered evidence of King Alden's betrayal, evidence connecting her own family's history directly to the treaty that had once bound noble houses to the Northern Realm. Near the final pages of the journal, her father had written what appeared to be a plan, a careful outline of how he intended to bring this evidence before the court, exposing King Alden's broken promises and restoring the rightful standing of the families who had been wronged. Tears blurred Elena's vision as she read her father's final entry, dated just days before the manufactured debt had destroyed everything her family once possessed. "Tomorrow, I will present this evidence to the court. Whatever the cost, the truth deserves to be known. If something happens to me before I can complete this task, I hope that whoever finds these pages will understand that I did not act out of ambition, but out of a belief that no king, however powerful, should be permitted to build his throne upon broken promises and forgotten loyalty." Elena carefully closed the journal, pressing it against her chest as quiet tears finally fell freely down her face. Her father had died trying to expose a truth greater than himself, and now, years later, that same truth had found its way back into her hands, carried forward by circumstances neither of them could have predicted. She did not have time to linger in her grief, however. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside jolted her back into cautious awareness, and she quickly tucked the journal into the folds of her dress before blowing out the candle and slipping quietly toward the shadows near the door. The footsteps passed without pausing, and Elena released a shaky breath of relief before making her way carefully back toward the servants' quarters, the weight of her father's journal pressed against her heart, like a promise she now intended to fulfill. The following afternoon, Elena made her way to the forest to share her discovery with Cale, practically running along the familiar path, in her eagerness to show him what she had found. Cale's expression shifted from curiosity to quiet astonishment as he read through the journal's pages, his gray eyes widening slightly as he reached the final entry. "This confirms everything," he said, looking up at her with genuine admiration. "Your father possessed direct evidence of King Alden's betrayal, evidence that connects your family's history to the treaty-binding noble houses to the north. Elena, this changes everything." "How so?" Elena asked. "With this evidence, I can prove to my remaining allies within Draven's territory that our cause is just, that we are not simply seeking to reclaim power for its own sake, but righting a wrong that has harmed multiple noble houses, including your own," Cale explained, his voice growing more animated than Elena had ever heard it. "This could help rally additional support before the uprising begins." Elena felt a surge of pride mixed with quiet grief, her father's sacrifice finally finding purpose after years of being buried beneath a manufactured lie. "I want to help you carry this fight forward, Cale. Not simply because it might restore my family's name, but because I believe, as my father did, that this truth deserves to be known." Cale reached for her hand, his expression serious and warm all at once. "Elena, I must return north soon, to continue preparing for the uprising. I had not intended to ask this so quickly, given everything else at stake, but I find myself unable to imagine continuing this fight without you standing beside me." Elena's heart quickened at his words. "What are you asking, Cale?" "Come north with me," he said simply. "Not now, not until it is safe to do so, but when the time comes, when my allies are ready and the path forward becomes clear, I want you standing beside me, not as a servant hiding evidence in dusty archive rooms, but as someone who has earned a place in whatever future we manage to build." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes once more, though this time they carried something far warmer than grief. "I would be honored to stand beside you, Cale, whatever the future holds." They sat together beneath the familiar oak tree as the afternoon light softened into evening, the journal resting carefully between them, a bridge connecting two painful pasts toward a future neither of them had dared imagine. Neither of them yet knew that their careful secrecy was already beginning to unravel, nor that the very evidence that had brought them such hope was about to become the catalyst for the most dangerous chapter of their story yet to come. That evening, as Elena made her way back toward the palace, she did not notice the figure watching from the shadows near the forest's edge, a guard loyal to Draven who had grown suspicious of her frequent, unexplained absences over the past several weeks. The guard had followed her at a careful distance that afternoon, close enough to witness her meeting with a mysterious stranger in the woods, though not close enough to overhear the details of their conversation. As Elena disappeared through the servants' entrance, the guard turned and made his way quickly toward the palace's upper halls, eager to report what he had witnessed to a king who had made it very clear that any hint of disloyalty from the woman he had cast down would not be tolerated. Draven's study was cold, despite the fire burning steadily in the hearth, and the king's expression grew darker with every word the guard spoke. "You are certain it was her," Draven said, his voice low and controlled, in a way that was far more dangerous than shouting would have been. "Yes, Your Majesty," the guard confirmed, standing rigidly before the king's desk. "I followed her into the forest on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks. Each time, she met with the same man near an old oak tree, well beyond the palace's regular patrol routes." "Did you recognize him?" "No, Your Majesty. He kept his hood raised during most of their conversations. But I did notice he carried himself like someone trained in combat, not like an ordinary traveler. Draven's jaw tightened, suspicion curling into something sharper and more dangerous. He had cast Elena down from the royal table because she lacked the wolf blood he believed a queen required, but he had never suspected she might be capable of something as bold as secret meetings with an unidentified stranger, meetings that could easily be interpreted as treason against the crown. "Bring her to me," Draven commanded. "Now." Elena was in the kitchen, helping Beatrice prepare the evening meal, when two guards appeared at the entrance, their expressions carefully blank in the way that always signaled trouble within the palace. "Elena Voss," one of the guards said, "the king requires your presence immediately." Beatrice's hands paused over the pot she had been stirring, worry flickering across her weathered face. "What is this about?" "That is not for you to know," the guard replied curtly. "Elena, come with us." Elena's heart pounded as she followed the guards through the palace corridors, her mind racing through every possible explanation Draven might have discovered. She thought immediately of her forest meetings with Kale, of the journal still hidden carefully beneath her mattress in the servants' quarters, and a cold dread settled over her as the guards led her toward Draven's private study, rather than the great hall, where she had first been humiliated months earlier. The study was smaller than the great hall, but somehow felt far more intimidating, lit only by firelight and lined with shelves of old books and maps. Draven stood near the window, his back turned toward the door, as Elena was brought inside, the guards remaining stationed at the entrance. "Leave us," Draven said, without turning around. The guards hesitated only briefly before obeying, closing the heavy wooden door behind them as they departed. Elena stood alone with Draven for the first time since the night of her banishment, her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for him to speak. "I have been informed," Draven finally said, turning to face her, "that you have been meeting secretly with a stranger in the forest beyond the palace grounds." Elena kept her expression carefully neutral, though her mind raced desperately for some way to protect Kale, and the truth she now carried, without outright lying to the king, who held complete authority over her fate. "I have taken walks in the forest, yes. I gather herbs for the kitchen." "Do not insult my intelligence, Elena," Draven said sharply. "You have been meeting with a man, repeatedly, in secret. My guard witnessed it himself. Who is he, and what have you been discussing?" "He is no one of consequence," Elena said carefully. "A traveler I found injured. I helped him recover, nothing more." Draven's eyes narrowed, studying her face with the same cold calculation he had shown the night he ordered her removed from the royal table. "You expect me to believe that a servant who was once cast down from my own royal table for being unworthy of a crown has simply been playing nursemaid to an injured stranger, out of nothing more than the goodness of her heart?" "Believe whatever you wish," Elena said, a flicker of the defiance that had carried her through the past several months, rising to the surface, despite her best efforts to remain calm. "It does not change the truth." "The truth," Draven repeated, his voice growing colder. "The truth, Elena, is that I have received reports suggesting the man you have been meeting is not simply a traveler, but someone connected to forces working against my crown. Reports suggest movements near the northern border, gatherings of exiled loyalists, preparing for something far more dangerous than a simple trade dispute." Elena's blood ran cold, though she fought to keep her expression steady. Draven's advisors had clearly begun piecing together fragments of Kale's activities, even if they had not yet confirmed his true identity. "I know nothing about northern politics," Elena said carefully. "I am a kitchen worker, Your Majesty. Nothing more." "A kitchen worker who was once meant to be my queen," Draven said, stepping closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the small study. "A kitchen worker whose father, I am now told, once possessed dangerous information about my own father's rule, information he intended to use against the crown before his conveniently timed downfall." Elena's breath caught, panic flaring sharply through her chest. Someone had told Draven about her father's journal, about the truth she had only just uncovered days earlier. "I do not know what you are referring to." "Do not lie to me," Draven said, his voice rising for the first time, anger finally breaking through his controlled exterior. "I have had this palace searched, Elena. A journal was found missing from the archive room, a journal that servants have confirmed you were seen entering alone, late at night, on multiple occasions." Elena's mind raced desperately, searching for some way to protect both herself and Kale. But she found no easy escape from the trap that had clearly been closing around her for days without her realizing it. "Where is the journal, Elena?" Draven demanded. "I do not have it," Elena lied, praying her voice remained steady enough to be believed. Draven studied her face for a long, tense moment, and Elena could see the exact moment he decided he did not believe her. "Search her quarters," he called out, and the study door opened immediately, guards who had apparently been waiting just outside stepping forward at his command. "You cannot do this," Elena said, panic finally breaking through her careful composure. "I have done nothing wrong. You have conspired with an enemy of the crown, hidden evidence of treason against my father's rule, and lied directly to my face," Draven said coldly. "That is more than enough to warrant whatever consequences I decide to impose." Elena watched in horror as the guards departed to search her quarters, knowing they would find the journal exactly where she had hidden it beneath her mattress. There was no way to protect the evidence now, no way to prevent Draven from discovering the full truth about her father, about her connection to Kale, and about everything they had been working toward together. "Draven," Elena said, using his name directly, for the first time since her banishment, desperation overriding the careful deference she had maintained since arriving at the palace. "Whatever you believe I have done, whatever evidence you find, the truth deserves to be heard. My father did not deserve to die in disgrace for trying to expose a wrong committed by your own father's rule." Something flickered across Draven's face, a brief crack in his cold composure that might have been uncertainty, or perhaps even guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried once again beneath the rigid control that had defined every interaction Elena had witnessed since her arrival at the palace. "You will remain in the dungeon until I have determined the full extent of your involvement in whatever conspiracy you have become entangled in," Draven said, his voice cold and final. "Guards, take her below." Elena did not resist, as the guards took hold of her arms and led her from the study, though her mind raced desperately with thoughts of Kale, of the journal that would soon be discovered, and of the uncertain fate that now awaited her in the depths of a palace that had already taken so much from her once before. The dungeon was cold and damp, lit only by a few flickering torches along the stone corridor that led toward a row of iron cells. Elena was placed inside one of them, the heavy door locking behind her with a sound that echoed ominously through the empty space. She sank down onto the thin layer of straw covering the stone floor, her mind racing through every possible outcome, none of them offering much comfort. Hours passed in the darkness, marked only by the distant, muffled sounds of palace life continuing somewhere far above her. Elena thought of Beatrice, worried and confused in the kitchen above. She thought of Mira, who would surely learn of her arrest and understand immediately the danger they had all been courting these past several weeks. And she thought of Kale, still waiting somewhere in the forest, unaware that everything they had worked toward now hung in desperate, uncertain balance. It was well past midnight when Elena heard footsteps approaching her cell, slow and deliberate against the stone floor. She rose carefully, uncertain what to expect, and found herself face to face with Kale, his features illuminated faintly by the torchlight, his expression a mixture of fury and desperate concern. "How did you get in here?" Elena whispered, moving quickly toward the iron bars separating them. "It does not matter," Kale said, his voice low and urgent. "Elena, I heard what happened. I came the moment I learned Draven had discovered your involvement. You should not be here," Elena said, glancing anxiously toward the corridor behind him. "If they discover you, everything we have worked toward will be lost." "I will not simply abandon you here," Kale said fiercely, reaching through the bars to take her hands in his. "Elena, listen to me carefully. I do not have much time before the guards complete their rounds again. I am going to find a way to get you out of here, whatever it takes. Kale, if you are caught helping me escape, Draven will have every reason to move against your cause immediately, before you are ready," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she could not deny the desperate hope his presence had ignited within her. "I do not care about timing anymore, not if it means losing you," Kale said, his gray eyes fierce and unwavering in the flickering torchlight. "Elena, I made you a promise beneath that oak tree, and I intend to keep it, whatever the cost. I will return for you, Elena, crowned or not. Trust me." Before Elena could respond, the distant sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, and Kale reluctantly released her hands, stepping back into the shadows. "Be strong," he whispered. "I will find a way. I promise you, Elena, this is not the end of our story." He disappeared into the darkness, just as a guard rounded the corner, and Elena sank back down onto the cold stone floor of her cell, clutching the memory of his final promise, like a fragile flame against the overwhelming darkness that surrounded her. Whatever dangers still lay ahead, whatever uncertain fate Draven intended to impose upon her, she found herself holding tightly to the quiet, unwavering conviction that Kale's promise would prove true, that this cold, damp cell was not where her story would end, but merely another difficult chapter on the path toward whatever future still waited to be written. 3 days passed in the darkness of the dungeon, each one blurring into the next, marked only by the brief moments when a guard would slide a plate of stale bread and water through the small opening at the bottom of her cell door. Elena had lost track of exact hours, though she suspected it was nearing evening on the 3rd day when she heard familiar footsteps approaching, quieter and more careful than the heavy tread of the palace guards. "Elena," a soft voice whispered through the darkness. Elena rose quickly, moving toward the bars, and found Mira crouched just outside her cell, a small ring of keys clutched tightly in one hand, and worry etched deeply across her features. "Mira," Elena breathed, relief and fear mixing together in her chest. "What are you doing here?" "If you are caught—" "There is no time to worry about that now," Mira interrupted, already working quickly to find the correct key among the rings she carried. "Beatrice managed to get these from the head guard's quarters while he was distracted during the evening meal. We do not have long before someone notices they are missing." "Mira, I heard Draven has scheduled something," Elena said urgently, as Mira worked the lock. "A guard mentioned it earlier, something about a public trial tomorrow morning." "I know," Mira said grimly, finally managing to turn the key and swing the heavy door open. "That is exactly why we need to move now, tonight, before he has the chance to carry out whatever punishment he has planned." Elena stepped out of the cell, her legs weak from days of confinement, but adrenaline quickly steadying her as Mira pressed a small bundle into her hands, containing a dark cloak and a simple traveling knife. "Beatrice packed some supplies for you," Mira explained, already leading Elena quickly down the dim corridor, away from the row of cells. "Bread, dried meat, enough to last you a few days if you travel carefully." She wanted to come herself, to say goodbye properly, but it was too dangerous with the extra guards posted tonight. "Tell her I am grateful for everything," Elena said, pulling the cloak tightly around her shoulders as they moved swiftly through the shadowed passages that Mira clearly knew well from years of navigating the palace's hidden corners. "You can tell her yourself someday, when it is safe to return," Mira said firmly, guiding Elena through a narrow servant's passage that Elena had never noticed during her months working in the palace. "For now, we need to get you beyond the palace walls, before the guards complete their next rounds." They moved carefully through the darkness, pausing occasionally when Mira's sharp ears caught the distant sound of approaching footsteps, ducking into shadowed alcoves until the danger passed. Elena's heart pounded with each near miss, though Mira's calm confidence helped steady her own rising panic. "How do you know this palace so well?" Elena whispered, as they paused behind a stack of old crates near what appeared to be a side entrance rarely used by the main household. "I told you once, I have worked in these stables for years," Mira replied quietly. "You learn a great deal about a place when everyone assumes you are too insignificant to notice anything important." They finally reached a small wooden door hidden behind overgrown ivy along the palace's outer wall, one that Elena suspected had not been used regularly in years. Mira produced another key from her collection and worked the rusted lock carefully, wincing at the slight creak the door made as it swung open to reveal the dark forest beyond. "This will lead you toward the northern road," Mira said, gesturing toward a faint path visible in the moonlight beyond the door. "Follow it carefully, and you should reach the border territory within a few days, if you travel quickly and avoid the main roads where patrols are more common." Elena turned to face Mira fully, gratitude and grief mingling together, as she realized the moment of parting had finally arrived. "Mira, I do not know how to thank you for everything you have done for me these past months." "You do not need to thank me," Mira said, though her voice carried an unfamiliar warmth beneath its usual practical tone. "You showed me, From the very first night you arrived in that kitchen, that kindness and strength are not opposites, that a person can hold both at once, even when the world tries to convince them otherwise. That is worth more than any thanks. Elena embraced her quickly, fiercely, before Mira gently pushed her toward the open door. Go now, Elena. Whatever waits for you beyond these walls, I believe you are strong enough to meet it. Will you be safe here, after they discover I am gone? Elena asked, hesitating at the threshold. I will manage, Mira said, with a confidence Elena hoped was justified. No one will suspect the stable hand of arranging a queen's escape. Now go, before I lose my nerve and decide to follow you myself. Elena offered one final, grateful smile, before stepping through the door into the darkness of the forest beyond, the heavy wooden door closing quietly behind her. As Mira disappeared back into the shadows of the palace, she had risked everything to help Elena escape. The forest at night felt entirely different from the peaceful afternoons Elena had spent there with Kale. Shadows stretching long and unfamiliar between the trees, the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures replacing the gentle birdsong she had grown accustomed to. She moved carefully along the path Mira had indicated, her senses heightened with every rustle of leaves and snap of distant branches. She had traveled for perhaps an hour when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses moving quickly through the forest behind her, accompanied by the shouts of men, clearly searching for something, or someone. Elena's blood ran cold, as she realized her absence must have already been discovered, far sooner than she or Mira had anticipated. She quickened her pace, moving off the main path and into the denser section of the forest, hoping the thicker trees might offer some cover from the approaching search party. Branches caught at her cloak and scraped against her arms as she pushed forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the sounds of pursuit grew steadily closer. There, movement near the eastern ridge, a voice called out, far closer than Elena would have liked. She broke into a full run, no longer caring about the noise she made as she crashed through the underbrush, desperate to put as much distance as possible between herself and the hunters closing in behind her. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she forced herself forward, driven by the memory of Kale's promise and her own fierce refusal to be captured, and returned to whatever fate Draven had planned for her public trial. A horse burst through the trees just ahead of her, cutting off her path forward, and Elena skidded to a halt, her heart hammering wildly, as she recognized the guard who had first reported her forest meetings to Draven, now mounted and clearly determined to complete his mission of recapturing her. There is nowhere left to run, the guard called out, dismounting quickly and drawing a short blade from his belt. The king wants you returned alive, but he did not specify in what condition. Elena's hand instinctively moved toward the small knife Mira had given her, though she had little training in how to use it effectively against a trained guard. Still, she refused to simply surrender without a fight, not after everything she had risked to reach this point. I will not go back, Elena said firmly, backing away slowly as the guard advanced. That is not your decision to make, the guard replied, lunging forward suddenly. Elena dodged to the side, years of quick reflexes developed during months of demanding kitchen work, serving her well, as she avoided his initial attack. She swung her small knife defensively, catching the guard's arm and drawing a shallow line of blood that made him hiss in surprised pain. You will regret that, the guard growled, advancing again with renewed aggression. Before he could close the distance, however, a sharp whistle cut through the night air, and an arrow suddenly embedded itself in the ground, just inches from the guard's feet, causing him to freeze in startled surprise. The next one will not miss, a familiar voice called out from the shadows, and Elena felt overwhelming relief flood through her as Kale emerged from the trees, another arrow already nocked and ready in his bow, several armed men flanking him on either side. The guard, clearly recognizing that he was now significantly outnumbered, backed away slowly before turning and fleeing into the darkness, presumably to report back to whatever larger search party remained scattered through the forest. Kale, Elena breathed, relief and exhaustion finally overwhelming her, as he quickly closed the distance between them, lowering his bow to pull her into a fierce embrace. I told you I would find a way, Kale said softly against her hair, his own relief evident in the way he held her close. When word reached me that Draven had scheduled a public trial, I gathered what allies I could and came as quickly as possible, praying I would reach you in time. How did you know I had already escaped? Elena asked, pulling back slightly to look up at him. I did not for certain, Cale admitted. But I trusted that you and your friends within the palace would find a way, given everything at stake. I simply hoped my own timing would align with whatever plan you managed to create. One of the men accompanying Cale stepped forward, glancing anxiously toward the direction the fleeing guard had disappeared. Your Majesty, we should move quickly. That guard will alert others soon, and we cannot risk a larger confrontation this deep within Draven's territory. Cale nodded, releasing Elena, but keeping a firm, steadying hand at her waist. Can you ride? He asked her. I can manage, Elena said, determination overriding her exhaustion. Cale led her quickly toward a small group of waiting horses, helping her mount before swinging up onto his own steed beside her. We ride north, toward the border, he said firmly. Once we cross into contested territory, Draven's authority weakens considerably, and my own allies will be able to offer proper protection. As their small group began moving swiftly through the forest, putting increasing distance between themselves and the palace that had held Elena captive for so many painful months, she allowed herself a brief, fierce moment of hope. Whatever dangers still lay ahead on the journey north, whatever uncertain future awaited her beyond Draven's territory, she was no longer facing it alone, huddled and frightened in a cold dungeon cell. She was riding toward something greater, toward a future she was determined to claim for herself, with Cale beside her every step of the way. The journey toward the northern border proved far more difficult than Elena had anticipated, the small group pushing their horses hard through the darkness, pausing only briefly to rest the animals, before continuing onward, as dawn began to break across the distant hills. Elena's body ached from hours spent riding, muscles she had never fully used protesting with every movement, but she pressed forward regardless, unwilling to slow the group's progress even for a moment. We will need to rest properly soon, Cale said, riding close beside her as the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting long shadows across the rough terrain they had been crossing throughout the night. The horses cannot continue at this pace much longer, and neither can you, despite your evident determination. I am fine, Elena insisted, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her exhaustion. There is no shame in needing rest, Elena, Cale said gently. We have put considerable distance between ourselves and the palace. A brief stop should not compromise our safety significantly. One of Cale's men, a broad-shouldered fighter named Edric who had remained mostly silent throughout the night's journey, rode up beside them with a concerned expression. Your Majesty, I have spotted signs of pursuit along the ridge behind us. Riders, moving quickly, following our general direction. Cale's expression hardened immediately. How many? Difficult to say for certain, but likely more than a small patrol, Edric replied grimly. Draven must have dispatched a significant force once he confirmed Elena's escape. We cannot outrun a full pursuit force while our horses remain this exhausted, Cale said, quickly assessing their surroundings with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to difficult tactical decisions. There is a narrow canyon pass approximately 2 hours ahead, if I recall the terrain correctly from my earlier scouting. If we can reach it before they catch up, the narrow passage would force any pursuers to approach single file, giving us a significant defensive advantage. And if we cannot reach it in time? Elena asked, fear tightening in her chest, despite her determination not to show it. Then we will face whatever comes with everything we have, Cale said firmly, though his gray eyes softened slightly as they met hers. I did not come this far to lose you now, Elena. Whatever happens, I promise you that. They pushed forward with renewed urgency, the horses straining beneath them as the group raced across increasingly rough terrain, the distant sound of pursuing riders growing steadily louder behind them despite their best efforts to maintain distance. Elena's arms ached from gripping the reins so tightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps that matched the pounding rhythm of her horse's hooves against the hard ground. There, the canyon entrance, Edric called out, pointing toward a narrow gap between two steep rock formations that had come into view ahead of them. They reached the canyon entrance just as the first of their pursuers crested the ridge behind them, close enough now that Elena could make out the distinct colors of Draven's royal guard among the approaching riders. Cale quickly directed his men into defensive positions along the narrow passage, while Elena dismounted alongside him, her small knife once again clutched firmly in her hand. Stay behind me, Cale instructed, positioning himself protectively in front of her as the pursuing guards approached the canyon entrance. The guard leading the pursuit force reined in his horse just outside the narrow passage, studying the defensive positions Cale's men had quickly established with obvious frustration. "By order of King Draven, you are commanded to surrender the fugitive Elena Voss immediately," the lead guard called out. "Resistance will only result in unnecessary bloodshed." "Elena Voss is under my protection now," Cale called back, his voice carrying clearly across the canyon entrance. "If your king wishes to reclaim her, he will need to answer for the false accusations and manufactured debts that destroyed her family, along with the truth about his father's broken promises to the noble houses of this kingdom." A murmur of confusion rippled through the guards at Cale's words, several exchanging uncertain glances. Elena realized quickly that Cale's declaration was not merely defiance, but a calculated attempt to plant seeds of doubt among Draven's forces, seeds that might prove valuable in the larger conflict still to come. "I do not know what claims you are making," the lead guard replied, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "But my orders are clear. Surrender the woman, or we will be forced to take her by strength." "Then you should know," Cale continued, his voice steady and commanding, "that you would be shedding blood to protect a lie. King Alden broke sacred agreements with families who trusted his word, families whose lands and standing were stripped away once they were no longer useful to his ambitions. Elena's father died trying to expose that truth. Are you prepared to kill innocent people today, simply to protect a secret that should never have been buried in the first place?" The guards hesitated, clearly uncertain how to proceed in the face of such direct accusations against the crown they served. Elena watched, her heart pounding, as doubt visibly spread among the assembled riders, several lowering their weapons slightly as they exchanged uncertain glances with one another. "Whatever accusations you make, our duty remains the same," the lead guard finally said, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments earlier. "Advance." Despite his command, only a handful of guards actually pressed forward into the narrow canyon passage, the majority remaining hesitant at the entrance, clearly troubled by the doubts Cale's words had planted. The guards who did advance found themselves quickly overwhelmed by Cale's men, who fought with practiced skill in the confined space, using the narrow terrain to their significant advantage. Elena watched anxiously from her position behind Cale, gripping her knife tightly, though she found no opportunity to use it as the brief but intense skirmish unfolded before her. Within minutes, the advancing guards had either been disarmed or forced to retreat, rejoining their hesitant companions at the canyon entrance. "This is not over," the lead guard called out, clearly recognizing the disadvantage of continuing the confrontation. "King Draven will send a larger force. There is nowhere in this kingdom you can hide from his authority forever." "We are not hiding," Cale replied firmly. "We are simply choosing when and where to reveal the truth. Tell your king that Cale Ashworth sends his regards, and that the debt his father created will soon be repaid in full, one way or another." The guards retreated slowly, clearly reconsidering their approach in the face of both Cale's forces and the unsettling truths he had spoken aloud before them. As the sound of their departing horses faded into the distance, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe fully again, exhaustion and relief crashing over her simultaneously. "That was a considerable risk," Elena said quietly, once the immediate danger had passed. "Revealing your identity so directly." "Perhaps," Cale acknowledged, sheathing his sword and turning to face her fully. "But sometimes, the truth proves a more powerful weapon than steel, especially against men who have simply been following orders, without questioning the deeper reasons behind them. Doubt, once planted, has a way of growing on its own." Edric approached, a few cuts and bruises visible from the brief skirmish but otherwise unharmed. "Your Majesty, we should continue moving. Even if that particular force has retreated, Draven will not simply abandon his pursuit." "Agreed," Cale said, helping Elena remount her horse before swinging back onto his own. "We continue north, toward the border and beyond, until we reach territory where my allies can offer proper protection." They pressed onward through the remainder of the day, the canyon pass gradually giving way to rolling hills and then eventually to denser forest as they drew closer to the border separating Draven's territory from the contested lands beyond. Elena's exhaustion grew steadily heavier with each passing hour, though the adrenaline of their earlier confrontation kept her alert and focused despite her body's clear need for proper rest. As evening approached once more, Kale finally called for the group to make camp within a small, sheltered clearing, surrounded by dense trees that offered reasonable protection from any further pursuit. Elena sank gratefully onto a fallen log near the small fire Edric quickly built, her entire body finally allowing itself to relax, now that immediate danger had passed. "You fought bravely today," Kale said, settling beside her as the other men moved about, tending to the horses and preparing a simple meal from their remaining supplies. "I did not fight at all," Elena said, managing a tired smile. "I mostly stood behind you, gripping a knife I barely know how to use properly. You stood your ground when danger was closing in around you, and you did not falter," Kale countered gently. "That is its own kind of bravery, Elena, whether or not you ever needed to use that knife." Elena leaned slightly into his shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking the last of her adrenaline. "How much farther until we reach your allies?" "2 more days, perhaps 3, depending on how careful we need to remain," Kale said, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. "Once we cross fully into the Northern Territories, you will finally be safe from Draven's immediate reach." "And then what?" Elena asked quietly. Kale was silent for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Then we continue preparing for what comes next. My allies have been gathering strength for months, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was taken from my family. With your father's journal as evidence, and with the truth we revealed today, already beginning to spread doubt among Draven's own forces, I believe that moment may be approaching faster than any of us anticipated." Elena closed her eyes, allowing herself, for just a moment, to imagine a future beyond the immediate danger and uncertainty that had defined nearly every day since her arrival at Draven's palace. A future where the truth about her father's sacrifice was finally known, where the debt used to destroy her family was revealed as the manufactured lie it truly was, and where she stood beside Kale, not as a fugitive fleeing through dangerous forests, but as someone who had earned her place through strength and determination, rather than the arbitrary judgment of a crown that had never truly seen her worth. "Whatever comes next," Elena said softly, "I intend to face it standing on my own 2 feet, not simply as someone who was rescued, but as someone who chose this path deliberately, with full understanding of everything it might require." Kale turned to look at her, admiration warm in his gray eyes, despite the exhaustion evident on both their faces. "I would expect nothing less from you, Elena Voss. Whatever crown eventually finds its way onto your head, I have no doubt you will wear it because you earned it, not because anyone simply gave it to you." They sat together beside the small fire, as darkness fully settled over the forest, the immediate danger of the day's pursuit finally giving way to quiet, exhausted rest, and the steady, growing certainty that whatever challenges still lay ahead on their journey north, they would face them together, bound by shared purpose and a truth too important to remain buried any longer. The Northern Territories revealed themselves gradually as Elena and Kale's small group continued their journey, the dense forests slowly giving way to rolling hills dotted with modest villages, each one displaying subtle signs of loyalty to Kale's cause that Elena had not expected to see so openly. Faded banners bearing the old northern crest hung discreetly in windows, and villagers who recognized Kale offered quiet nods of respect as the group passed through, careful not to draw unwanted attention from any remaining spies loyal to Draven's territory. "They remember," Elena observed quietly, as they passed through a small village where an elderly man had bowed his head respectfully toward Kale before quickly returning to his work. "Some of them do," Kale said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and lingering sadness. "Others were too young when my family was exiled to remember what life was like before the usurpers took control. But the stories have been passed down, quietly, carefully, waiting for the day when the rightful crown might return." By the 3rd day, they finally reached what Kale described as the heart of the resistance, a fortified settlement hidden within a valley surrounded by steep, defensible hills, far from the reach of Draven's forces or the usurper lords who had claimed control over the northern throne in Kale's absence. The settlement bustled with activity, filled with trained fighters, skilled craftsmen repairing weapons and armor, and messengers moving quickly between different groups clearly coordinating something significant. "Your Majesty," a woman called out as they entered the settlement, hurrying forward with clear relief evident on her weathered face. "We feared something had happened when you did not return on schedule." I encountered complications, Alara, but nothing that could not be overcome, Kale said, dismounting and helping Elena down from her own horse. Alara, this is Elena Voss. Elena, Alara has served as my most trusted advisor throughout these years of exile. Alara studied Elena with sharp, assessing eyes, though her expression remained carefully neutral. The kitchen worker from Draven's palace, she said, not unkindly, though clearly aware of exactly who Elena was. Word of your escape has already begun spreading through the border villages. I hope that does not create additional complications, Elena said carefully. On the contrary, Alara replied, a faint smile finally breaking through her guarded expression. The story of a wronged noblewoman, escaping an unjust king, has proven remarkably useful in rallying additional support among villages who remained uncertain about openly joining our cause. Sympathy for your situation has done more to strengthen our position than weeks of careful diplomacy. Kale glanced at Elena with a mixture of apology and quiet amusement. I did warn you that our fight would require more than simply reclaiming a throne through strength alone. Over the following days, Elena settled into the rhythm of the resistance settlement, finding herself drawn into strategic discussions alongside Kale and his most trusted advisors as they prepared for what Alara referred to as the final push toward reclaiming the Northern Crown. Her father's journal proved invaluable, providing concrete evidence that helped convince several remaining noble houses to formally commit their support to Kale's cause, swayed by the undeniable proof of King Alden's broken promises and manipulative consolidation of power. The evidence you brought has accomplished more in a single week than months of careful negotiation, Alara admitted one evening, as she, Kale, and Elena reviewed maps spread across a wide wooden table within the settlement's central hall. Several houses that remained hesitant have now formally pledged their support, unwilling to continue standing behind a crown built upon such clear betrayal. How soon can we move forward? Kale asked, studying the map carefully. Within the week, I believe, Alara said. The usurper lords currently controlling the northern throne have grown complacent, confident that your exile remains permanent. They will not be prepared for a coordinated uprising of this scale. Elena listened carefully to the strategic discussions, gradually understanding the full scope of what Kale had been building during his years of exile. A careful, patient resistance movement designed not simply to seize power through force, but to restore rightful leadership with the genuine support of the people who had suffered under years of illegitimate rule. I want to help however I can, Elena said, once the strategic discussion had concluded, and Alara had departed to coordinate with the various noble houses preparing to commit their forces. Whatever role you believe would be useful, I am prepared to fulfill it. Kale studied her carefully, something warm and admiring evident in his gray eyes. Your presence alone has already proven invaluable, Elena. But if you are truly prepared to commit yourself fully to this cause, there is something specific I would ask of you. What is it? When we move against the usurper lords, I would like you to stand beside me, publicly, as someone who has suffered directly under the corrupted system that Draven's father built, and that these usurpers have continued to benefit from, Kale said carefully. Your story, combined with the evidence from your father's journal, could prove powerful in rallying the final support we need among villages, still uncertain about openly committing to our cause. Elena considered his request seriously, understanding both the opportunity and the risk it represented. I am not afraid to stand beside you, Kale. If sharing my story helps bring this fight to a swifter, more successful conclusion, then I am prepared to do exactly that. The following week passed in a blur of careful preparation, as Kale's forces, now significantly strengthened by the additional noble houses who had pledged their support, made final arrangements for their coordinated move against the usurper lords controlling the northern throne. Elena found herself speaking before gathered crowds in several border villages, sharing her story alongside carefully selected passages from her father's journal, watching as uncertain faces gradually transformed into determined resolve. You have a gift for this, Kale observed, after one particularly successful gathering, where an entire village had formally pledged their support following Elena's address. People believe you, Elena, because they can see the truth in your eyes when you speak. I am simply telling them what actually happened, Elena said. There is no great skill required in speaking honestly about pain and injustice that people have already suspected existed. even if they lacked the concrete proof to challenge it openly before now. As the day of the coordinated uprising finally approached, Elena found herself standing beside Kale, at the edge of the resistance settlement, watching as fighters from across the northern territories gathered in preparation for the march toward the capital, where the usurper lords maintained their illegitimate hold on power. "Are you frightened?" Elena asked quietly, watching the assembled forces with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Always. Before something this significant," Kale admitted honestly. "But fear does not change what needs to be done. It simply reminds you how much is truly at stake." Elena reached for his hand, drawing strength from the steady warmth of his grip. "Whatever happens today, I am grateful to have found my way to this moment beside you, Kale. Whatever the outcome, I do not regret the path that led me here." Kale turned to face her fully, his expression serious and warm all at once. "Elena, whatever happens in the battle ahead, I want you to know that you have already given me something I thought I had lost forever during my years of exile. Not simply an ally in this fight, but genuine hope for the kind of future I want to build once this crown is finally reclaimed." Before Elena could respond, Ilara approached, her expression carrying the focused urgency of someone prepared to lead troops into decisive battle. "Your Majesty, the forces are ready. The usurper lords remain unaware of the scale of what approaches them." Kale nodded, releasing Elena's hand reluctantly, before turning his full attention toward the assembled army awaiting his command. "Then let us finally reclaim what rightfully belongs to the people of this kingdom." The march toward the capital proved swift and largely unopposed. The usurper lord's forces caught entirely unprepared for the scale of the coordinated resistance now moving against them. Village after village opened their gates willingly as Kale's forces passed through, joining the growing procession with genuine enthusiasm, rather than the fear that had characterized years of illegitimate rule. The final confrontation, when it finally arrived at the gates of the northern capital, proved decisive rather than prolonged. Faced with overwhelming support for Kale's rightful claim and clear evidence of the corruption that had enabled the usurper lord's illegitimate rule, most of the opposing forces quickly abandoned their posts, rather than fight for a cause they no longer genuinely believed in. The remaining resistance collapsed within hours, and by evening, Kale stood before the northern capital's Grand Hall, formally reclaiming the throne that had been unjustly taken from his family years earlier. Elena watched from the crowd as Kale addressed the gathered citizens, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, as he spoke not of vengeance against those who had wronged his family, but of building a future defined by justice, transparency, and genuine care for the people he now intended to serve as their rightful king. When his eyes found hers among the crowd, something warm and unmistakably certain passed between them, a silent promise that the fight they had shared together was finally reaching its long-awaited conclusion. That evening, as celebrations continued throughout the reclaimed capital, Kale found Elena standing quietly near the palace gardens, watching the distant lights of the city she had helped restore to its rightful leadership. "You did this," Elena said softly, as he approached. "You reclaimed what was rightfully yours." "We did this," Kale corrected gently, taking her hand once again. "Elena, I would not have reached this moment without your courage, your father's evidence, and your unwavering belief that truth deserves to be known, whatever the cost required to reveal it." He reached into his cloak and withdrew a small, ornate box, opening it carefully to reveal a delicate crown, simpler than the elaborate designs Elena had seen displayed in Draven's palace, but no less significant for its understated elegance. "Elena Voss," Kale said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his gray eyes, "I am asking you now, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I have never felt more certain of anything in my life. Will you rule beside me, as my equal, as someone who has earned her place through strength and sacrifice, rather than mere birthright?" Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as she looked at the crown before her, thinking of everything that had led her to this moment: the humiliation at Draven's table, the months of quiet strength forged in a palace kitchen, the truth uncovered in a dusty archive room, and the dangerous journey north that had finally brought her to this garden, standing beside a man who saw her not as a mistake to be corrected, but as someone worthy of standing beside him as an equal. "Yes," Elena said softly, her voice carrying quiet certainty despite the tears finally falling freely down her face. "Yes, Kale, I will rule beside you." Word of the Northern Uprising's success spread quickly across the kingdom, carried by traveling merchants and cautious messengers who whispered the story from village to village, until it eventually reached Draven's palace, arriving in the form of a formal letter, delivered directly to the throne room, where the Alpha King now sat with a heavier crown than he remembered wearing just months earlier. "They are saying," one of his advisors reported carefully, clearly uncertain how the king would receive the news, "that Cale Ashworth has reclaimed the northern throne, and that the woman standing beside him as his queen is none other than Elena Voss." Draven's expression remained carefully controlled, though something tightened visibly in his jaw at the mention of her name. "The servant girl," he said quietly, more to himself than to the advisor standing before him. "The Queen of the North, Your Majesty," the advisor corrected carefully. "Formal correspondence has already begun circulating among the noble houses, confirming her position and requesting recognition of the Northern Kingdom's restored sovereignty." Draven said nothing for a long moment, memories of that final night in his study flooding back unbidden, the desperate defiance in Elena's eyes as she had spoken of her father's sacrifice, the truth he had refused to fully acknowledge, even as his own guards discovered the journal that confirmed everything she had claimed. He had told himself, in the months since her escape, that he had done nothing wrong, that maintaining order within his kingdom required decisive action against potential treason, regardless of whatever painful history might have motivated it. But standing now in his throne room, faced with undeniable proof that the woman he had cast down as unworthy had risen to become a queen in her own right, ruling beside a man whose claim to power rested on genuine justice rather than manufactured lies, Draven found the comfortable justifications he had constructed for himself growing increasingly difficult to maintain. "Prepare a formal response," Draven finally said, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding certainty. "Acknowledge the Northern Kingdom's restored sovereignty." The advisor bowed and departed quickly, leaving Draven alone, with thoughts he had spent months carefully avoiding. He thought of his father's rule, of the whispered rumors he had always dismissed as bitter gossip from disgruntled nobles, of the broken promises Edmund and countless other palace servants had witnessed firsthand, but never dared speak openly about until circumstances finally forced the truth into the light. 3 weeks later, when a formal delegation from the Northern Kingdom arrived at Draven's palace, requesting a meeting to discuss the establishment of proper diplomatic relations between the two territories, Draven found himself standing in the same great hall where he had once publicly humiliated Elena, watching as she entered once again, though everything about her presence had fundamentally changed since that painful night. She wore no elaborate gown, chosen to prove her worthiness before a critical court, no careful, practiced expression, designed to hide her true feelings from watching eyes. Instead, she walked with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who no longer needed anyone's approval to know her own worth, dressed simply but elegantly, in the deep blue colors of the Northern Kingdom, a delicate crown resting naturally upon her head, as though she had been born to wear it. Beside her walked Cale, his presence commanding without arrogance, his gray eyes steady and watchful, as they surveyed the same hall where his beloved had once been cast down and humiliated before an entire court. "King Draven," Cale said formally, once the initial ceremonial greetings had concluded, "we come today not as enemies seeking conflict, but as neighboring kingdoms, seeking a foundation for genuine, honest cooperation moving forward." Draven studied them both carefully, memories of his own arrogance and cruelty weighing heavily despite his best efforts to maintain the composed authority his position demanded. "I understand," he finally said, "that considerable truths have come to light since Elena's departure from this palace. Truths about my father's rule that I was not previously aware of. Truths that your father worked very deliberately to bury," Elena said, speaking for the first time since entering the hall, her voice carrying none of the fear or uncertainty that had characterized her final desperate conversation with Draven in his private study. "Truths that cost my own father his life, and nearly cost me mine as well." Draven's jaw tightened, though he did not attempt to deny or deflect her words as he might once have done. "I acted based on incomplete information and unfounded suspicions of your loyalty," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for a man unaccustomed to acknowledging his own mistakes. "That does not excuse the manner in which I treated you, Elena, both during our arranged marriage and in the aftermath of discovering your connection to Cale's cause." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of the genuine remorse his words seemed to suggest. She found, to her mild surprise, something that looked authentic beneath his carefully maintained composure. A king, finally beginning to reckon with the weight of choices made in service of maintaining power, built upon a foundation he had not fully understood, until circumstances forced the truth into unavoidable light. "I did not come here seeking an apology, Draven," Elena finally said. "I came here because Kale and I both believe that genuine peace between our kingdoms requires honesty, moving forward, rather than the careful lies and manufactured debts that defined the relationship between our families in the past." "What would you have me do?" Draven asked, and Elena noted, with quiet satisfaction, that the question carried genuine uncertainty, rather than the dismissive arrogance he had once displayed so readily. "Acknowledge publicly what your father did to the noble houses, who once stood loyal to legitimate agreements he later chose to break," Elena said firmly. "Restore whatever standing and resources can still be returned to those families who suffered under his broken promises, and recognize the Northern Kingdom's sovereignty formally and permanently, without the lingering resentment that has poisoned relations between our territories for far too long." Draven considered her request carefully, and for a moment, Elena wondered whether the pride that had once defined his every action might resurface to reject terms that required such significant acknowledgement of his father's wrongdoing. But finally, he nodded slowly, something that might have been genuine respect flickering briefly across his features. "I will do as you ask," Draven said, "not simply because circumstances demand it, but because I have had considerable time to reflect on the kind of king I wish to become, separate from the shadow of my father's choices." "Your courage in facing everything this palace once put you through, Elena, and the strength you have shown in building a genuinely just kingdom alongside King Kale, has taught me more about true leadership than I care to admit." The formal negotiations that followed proceeded smoothly, resulting in a treaty that restored proper recognition and resources to the noble houses wronged by King Alden's broken promises, while establishing clear terms for peaceful cooperation between the Northern Kingdom and Draven's territory moving forward. As the lengthy meetings finally concluded and evening approached, Elena found herself standing once more in the same great hall, where her story had first taken its painful turn, though everything about the moment now felt entirely different. "Are you satisfied?" Kale asked quietly, joining her near the tall windows overlooking the palace grounds where she had once wandered as a grieving servant searching for hidden truths. "I am," Elena said, and found that she genuinely meant it. "I did not come here seeking revenge, Kale. I came here seeking justice and closure, and I believe we have found both." Kale wrapped an arm gently around her shoulders, and together they watched as the sun began to set beyond the palace grounds, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "Are you ready to return home?" he asked softly. "Home," Elena repeated, testing the word thoughtfully. "Yes, I believe I am." Before they departed, Elena made one final stop, making her way down toward the palace kitchens, where she had once spent countless hours scrubbing pots and learning the quiet strength that would eventually carry her through everything that followed. Beatrice looked up from her work as Elena entered, her weathered face breaking into a wide, joyful smile. "Look at you," Beatrice said, wiping her hands quickly on her apron, before pulling Elena into a warm, fierce embrace. "A queen, standing in my kitchen once again. I will always remember this kitchen, Beatrice," Elena said, tears gathering in her eyes as she embraced the woman who had shown her such quiet, unexpected kindness during the darkest months of her life. "And everything you taught me here." Mira appeared moments later, having been summoned by word of Elena's return, and the reunion between the three women carried a warmth that no royal ceremony could ever hope to replicate. They spoke for nearly an hour, sharing stories and quiet laughter, before Elena finally rose to rejoin Kale, who waited patiently near the palace entrance. "You will always have a place in the Northern Kingdom, both of you," Elena said, as she prepared to depart. "Whenever you wish it, my doors remain open." As Elena finally rode north alongside Kale, leaving behind the palace that had once tried to break her spirit through humiliation and cruelty, she found herself reflecting on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the frightened, humiliated young woman who had once been led down to a servant's kitchen, stripped of every marker that once defined her identity. She thought of the quiet strength she had discovered scrubbing pots alongside Beatrice, the courage she had found searching dusty archive rooms for buried truths, and the unexpected love that had grown steadily between herself and a wounded stranger beneath an old oak tree. That frightened young woman was gone now, replaced by someone far stronger, someone who understood that true worth was never determined by the judgment of others, but by the quiet, unwavering strength a person carried within themselves, regardless of circumstance. As they crossed once more into the Northern Territories, Elena felt the weight of her crown settle comfortably upon her head, no longer a symbol of privilege she needed to prove herself worthy of, but a genuine reflection of everything she had earned through strength, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Beside her rode Cale, steady and constant, the partner she had found in the most unexpected of circumstances, and together they rode toward a future built not upon manufactured lies and careful cruelty, but upon genuine justice, hard-won trust, and a love that had proven strong enough to carry them both through the darkest days of their shared story. The palace that had once forced her to eat with the servants faded slowly into the distance behind them, and Elena did not look back. Ahead lay her true home, her true crown, and a future entirely her own, shaped by every difficult step of the journey that had finally led her there.